It's absolutely insane what news has arrived today. It's probably the most important news since the year 2025, and it's exactly the news that will finally allow the markets to breathe again. Simply is because the core problem has finally been solved here. We've seen it over the past few days and weeks. The markets have been bleeding endlessly. It was a pure bloodbath since the end of February, both in the traditional markets, so it didn't just hit crypto, but also the traditional markets. And now finally we can breathe again. We have officially received the news, Lewis personally from Donald Trump, Yatron and Astru, that the trade tariffs are now paused for 90 days, making it the most important news we could have received, and thus the most bullish news ever. Simply because the overall markets were suppressed by all the trade tariffs, it caused extreme uncertainty. It was an up and down, back and forth, especially from Donald Trump himself, because on one hand, he repeatedly announced new restrictions and was unwundbar zum eins handikut under set new trade tariffs. We saw it in the last few days, and now finally, the market can breathe again because now there is a calculable factor, a certain level of security. And one must understand, uncertainty in the market is thus the greatest poison there is. And precisely because of this poison was removed from the market. And that's why we can finally breathe sustainably again. This is not just a part news-driven movement. So this current pump we are seeing in Bitcoin and also in the traditional markets in Dan is not a pump that is due to just news like back then. For example, from the crypto summit, in this case, it is truly sustainable because the root problem, the core of the issue, has been resolved. And that is a knot untied by the market. And that's why we can breathe easily again. This is just the beginning of a larger trend reversal, simply because the entire sell-off also occurred in the traditional markets. So we see it here in the S&P 500. Here too, the entire sell-off was only due to the fact that all the trade tariffs came into effect. And when this burden is lifted from the overall market, combined with relatively good macroeconomic factors, we also see here again how inflation was extremely suppressed simply because the entire market was in uncertainty. We also saw that we had reached new lows in oil prices. And this naturally benefits the Fed greatly because now more interest rate cuts have been priced in for the year 2025. Thus, we can also initiate the process of risk on assets, of cheap liquidity being flushed back into the markets. We saw a similar scenario in 2020-21. It will most likely not happen as quickly from one day to the next, but we are still relatively close to the end of the process. We can also take a look at the dependency of Bitcoin on Ethereum here. And here this is also an image that I have repeatedly included in my YouTube videos, the US balance sheet showing whether we are in an expansive monetary policy or a restrictive one. And only when we saw the trend reversal in monetary policy did we also see the trend reversal, and Ethereum was able to outperform Bitcoin. And that is exactly the moment when the altcoins outperform Bitcoin. That's why I have absolutely no worries about the coming months. And here too, we see new lows being reached on the RSI. So at the moment, everything strongly indicates that the overarching trend reversal has been initiated. And this is exactly the process I explained in my last YouTube videos. So once again, you can watch the video here. 4 weeks ago, I had already announced what Trump's overarching goal is. What is his secret plan? He has come into this position precisely because of the trade tariffs to have better trading leverage against other countries. We also see it here. President Trump offers to talk. So he essentially wants to initiate a meeting with the official president of China. We see the whole thing here. It actually arrived 20 minutes ago as I'm recording this video. And we also see here that Donald Trump has received an extremely high number of requests from other countries to resolve the whole issue with the trade tariffs. Then, this is exactly the plan of Donald Trump, which he has been pursuing from the very beginning, namely to put pressure on other countries, thereby having the upper hand, so that his demands and requirements in general are enforced. And this is exactly what is becoming apparent at this current moment. Most likely, a lot is already happening behind closed doors. So I think all the news that arrives here is already delayed, so I can well imagine that a lot has already been discussed behind closed doors, so that now a DS tariff pause of 90 days can occur. And as I said, I can well imagine that this is the introduction to a larger trend reversal. It is also exactly the scenario that I mentioned in the last video, that very few understand. I knew what will really happen in April, and no one is prepared. This is also related to the topic of global. Liquidity is something to do, so you can definitely use the last video again, and it's very important to me to only produce a YouTube video when something significant happens in the market. You have to imagine I'm not really financially dependent on my YouTube channel. And precisely because of that, I only want to provide real value when something actually happens, not like other YouTubers who force themselves to produce a video every day. That's not my style on my YouTube channel. And that's why, yes, so you are informed about that. In case anyone was wondering why there are now 2 weeks for a new YouTube video, but if the market offers more again, if new opportunities arise, I will accordingly be much more active again. That's why you can, of course, support me by leaving a like and subscribing so you won't miss any further videos. That's all for now. Otherwise, the whole trend reversal has obviously also made itself felt in the overall altcoin market. We now have almond green numbers again on a daily basis. I will talk about this again at the end of the video, what I personally have adjusted in my strategy, what I have bought again. So feel free to stay tuned until the end. Otherwise, let's briefly talk about the scenarios. This is also, I would say I'm in an overview that I already mentioned in one of the last videos. It's about what is really realistic and whether we can assume that the bull run will continue. In my opinion, everything is still intact. We can also see it here on a daily basis with Bitcoin. A massive falling wedge has formed, an extremely strong downward trend line. And as soon as this is broken on a daily basis, we can definitely assume a breakout. At the current time, we should not get excited too early. It could well be that we see even lower lows. However, in my opinion, this is super unrealistic simply because now the knot was untied in the overall market due to the trade tariffs. Therefore, I can well imagine that we will slowly but surely see a breakout here, so that the long-term downtrend is broken. And by the way, this is also noticeable on a weekly basis when you look at the 50 EMA view. So we can gladly switch over to the weekly view, and there we can very, very well recognize that we have a similar scenario as in August 2024. We can see this here. We perfectly pierced with a candle wick on the 50 EMA. Here, everyone thought the bull run is over or we are going back to 35,000 US dollar. But that was not the case here either, and this is becoming noticeable again here because one must definitely understand that the 50 SMA is an extremely important indicator of whether the overarching trend and the general bull run are still intact. We also saw this in the last cycle where we found support here once before the double top occurred with Bitcoin, and only then, when the 50 EMA was breached, do we see the official introduction of the bear market. And that's why it was definitely very nice and very important to see that we found support here again. So that you are informed in this regard, I personally am not worried about it at all. The bull run is, in my opinion, completely normal, still intact. And as I said, we have to rely on Bitcoin because at the end of the day, Bitcoin is the big driving force. And that's why the lower scenario in gray is that a cycle break occurs, that the 50 SMA is broken, and also a structural break occurs at 74,000 US dollars is rather unrealistic at the current time. So I remain true to my plan that we will see a continuation here, either in Q2 or even the scenario where we have a cycle top at the end of Q4, so the end of 2025, or even the beginning of 2026. In my opinion, this is also relatively realistic. So we just have to wait and see how the current summer behaves. Of course, also accordingly, how the Fed acts, how many interest rate cuts will be priced in, when will QT finally be stopped. So as I said, this is also an extremely important factor, was when this restrictive monetary policy will come to an end. Because only then, when the process ends, can more liquidity flow back into the markets. That's definitely the current state of affairs. We can see it. Also based on the USDT dominance, which has risen again slightly, and of course, due to the current news, has resurfaced. So we can also see quite well that we have quite a bit of leeway. This means that currently, a lot of stablecoins are parked in wallets, ready to be invested in the market. And we can also see these local bottoms that we had. Once during the March upswing of 2024, and also accordingly during the November-December upswing. We can then see that liquidity is entering the markets, or rather USDT stablecoins are being deployed into certain assets, into certain altcoins. And here it is definitely nice to see that we have, of course, recorded an increase. It is extremely important that no capital is withdrawn from the crypto market, but rather this capital is just rotating into stablecoins, yes. So the money essentially stays within the ecosystem, within crypto. It is not completely withdrawn, but only rotated into USDT stablecoins. And at the current moment, we still have some leeway for some stablecoins to enter the market in the coming weeks. Otherwise, regarding Google Trends, we also see a nice development here, in my opinion, that we have completely cooled down again. And that is, I would say, also the big advantage of the current starting situation that we have carried out a complete cleansing of the market. It was a thorough cleaning, especially of weak investors and generally of all the indicators, which have now completely cooled down again. And precisely because of this, we have a very good foundation on which we can currently build, especially when the overall retail interest has decreased. We see here the search term for crypto, where we have also reached new lows, almost the same lows we had in the bear market of 2023, or even here in the summer slump. June, July, August, we also had values of 10, 11, which we can now recognize again at the current time. So that's nice to see, of course. I also notice it, to be honest, on my YouTube channel that some views have also dropped, but this is very, very typical that the general public is driven away when the market is not doing so well. It's performing poorly. But that's exactly what distinguishes the winners from the losers. So the viewers, especially those of you watching the current video, you will later be among the winners, simply because you are engaging with crypto now and not just jumping back on the bandwagon when everything is extremely expensive again, when the prices are extremely high again. So definitely, congratulations to those of you who are still fighting, still investing time and energy in the crypto market, and of course, potentially capital. And that you, in this regard, are informed. Before we talk about the altcoins in a moment, I have a new partner on board where you can snag a bonus again, namely at CoinW. With this exchange, I will now also cooperate long-term, simply because you have the best conditions here to both buy cryptocurrencies and, of course, execute individual trades. That's why I have here secured a small bonus for you right at the start. You definitely have the opportunity to snag up to 3,000 USCT. So this is not a raffle or anything, but if you meet certain criteria, you can receive up to 3,000 USCT, completely free of charge. So you can take a closer look at the whole thing here. Depending on how much trading volume you generate, you will receive a bonus here. And even 1 million, 3 million sounds relatively a lot, but it's actually brought in relatively quickly. If you, let's say, trade with $1,000, use a tenfold leverage, execute some trades, then you will directly have the bonus that you can snag. So it actually goes relatively quickly if you are actively trading. Of course, this is only for experienced traders, so don't gamble away your capital here. But if you are actively looking for an exchange, you can definitely take advantage of the offer here, because as mentioned, you can snag a bonus here. That's all for that. Otherwise, I would like to talk about some positions here, simply because, in my opinion, there are very, very good opportunities arising. Again, especially, yes, it's very important to understand, especially when you assume now that these overarching partitions are initiated. If you personally believe that the current downward trend will continue, that we will see prices of 50, 60,000 US dollars, then of course it doesn't make sense to invest more capital now, in my opinion, at the current time. It's purely a game of probability, and for me, the probability is significantly, significantly higher that we will see a continuation, that we can soon expect higher prices again. Simply because here, the knot was untied, which was basically the original problem of the trade tariffs. That's why I can easily imagine that the bottom levels have been reached in some projects. And that's why I want to highlight some, or rather, talk about a few specific altcoins that I have personally increased my holdings in again. And among others, Chainlink has returned to extremely good levels, especially the 11 or 12 dollars is in itself a perfect area to find entries again. That's definitely my opinion, especially because, of course, Chainlink is also the largest project by Made in the USA. So, you know, all the Made in USA coins. And I think especially these altcoins will benefit particularly strongly in the next upswing. And especially Chainlink is, for me personally, a player that has established itself, which will still be around in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. That's why here I have added more capital. Just like with the next project at Ondo, in my opinion, bottom levels have also been reached at 87 US dollars. These are accordingly also dream prices, which one could only dream of. A few months ago, when Ondo was still here at just about 2 US dollars. That's why I have also built up a small tranche here. I know, of course, that many of you don't want to hear about the whole topic of buying more, because many out there, including myself, so I definitely don't want to exclude myself in this regard. Personally, I also had invested way too much. Now looking back, I was also relatively aggressively invested, especially here in November and December. I had quite a bit of capital in all the altcoin positions and still have some of it. As I said, I have also reallocated significantly. You can, of course, watch the old videos where I officially announced how my strategy has changed, but nevertheless, it hit me extremely hard because I was practically only invested in altcoins. But still, the whole situation doesn't stop me, of course, from buying more now. So I'm using my current cash flow which is available to me to invest in certain projects again. This includes definitely Chainlink, Ondo, HSI, and also Near Protocol, Aunpan, and which in my opinion are at absolute dream prices at 2 US cents. You might say, so I personally did not expect that we would see such a strong drop in such a good project, at such a good blue chip project, essentially, the leading AI player, that we would see such a strong pullback. But also, I see Near Protocol at 10 US dollars and higher in the coming months, especially if the monetary policy changes again. Otherwise, the next project is Bittensour Tau, an absolute classic. In my opinion, definitely a safe bet that one can take advantage of. This is not financial advice, but for me personally, the risk is extremely manageable when it comes to Bittensour Tau. And you have to imagine the last all-time high. If we return to the previous levels, then we can assume that we can easily take a threefold increase. So in my opinion, it's almost like a given. Threefold increase that we get here. I can't imagine that Bittensour Tau will never return to its previous highs. So this is, in my opinion, relatively manageable in terms of the current risk-reward ratio. We can also see quite well all the contact points we have here at, well, around 200 US dollars. So once here, we have always come back and never broken through this important support. And in my opinion, that is also a good sign that here Bittensour Tau stabilizes and then also forms the ultimate bottom here. That's definitely all on that. Then the next project, Injective, equally good in my opinion. Paul AI is also holding up very well indeed. And indeed, even with other altcoin positions, I actively keep an eye out. We see all the AI coins here, and I always like to sort through them on a 24-hour basis because in my opinion, this is one of the most important indicators of which projects will perform best in the next upswing. And that's why I still have projects in mind that I have repeatedly mentioned in my YouTube videos, such as Vertical AI, Paul AI, even indeed a project like Morphware. It may be hard to believe, but even some low caps are, in my opinion, super interesting at the current time. I'm extremely cautious, so you know. So I definitely don't want to now make any major purchase recommendations here. But still, from a purely rational perspective, some charts are very, very, very close to the bottom range. So very, very, very well positioned in consolidation phases where you can also load up on certain projects. Here, one must be aware of the risk. Especially with low caps, you can still get burned extremely, extremely quickly. So definitely be cautious there. But even projects like Morphware are delivering. The chart looks good. And no, I am not paid by Morphware. Nevertheless, it is definitely a project that I continue to keep an eye on. Just like other players here, Neural.ai, Pinlink. Yes, of course, you have to wait and see what even comes back. I can also well imagine that some projects may never reach their all-time highs again. You definitely have to be particularly careful this cycle simply because there are significantly more altcoin projects out there than in the last cycle. But still, I can well imagine that there are still several 10, 20, 30, 50x coins on my list. But I will definitely keep you updated, especially, of course, when new projects come out. You definitely have to be particularly vigilant, especially at the current time. That's why I have prepared 1 or 2 projects for you that haven't been launched yet, which are basically still to come. Among others, I currently have a project in mind that comes from Revolving Games. So this is a relatively large game studio. Been around since January 2022. So in this case, it's not something that appeared on the market overnight. They also have a relatively good track record from other games that have already been published. So it is definitely a very, very large established game studio. And they definitely have a new game now, which they have released, or rather has not yet launched, where you can definitely be one of the first. It's called Hedge Kings, as mentioned, published by Revolving Games. And in this case, what I particularly like is that it's actually a community project. So here you have the opportunity to farm the token when you play the game. I've also linked it in my video description because here you definitely have the opportunity to farm this token now so that you can receive an airdrop later when the game is published. It can certainly be a good opportunity to be one of the first here. As I said, one thing I can tell you at the current time, at the moment, no one is interested in crypto, and especially for low caps and especially for projects that have not yet been released. Almost no one is interested. It's maybe 1 in 1,000 who is still digging here, still looking to see which projects have potential. That's why I actually have my eye on this, especially, of course, on projects that have not yet launched, and particularly, of course, on projects that cannot be dumped by VCs in any way. I can give you an example. There are certain projects like ICP, which was completely destroyed by VC investors, meaning large investors who bought in nicely during the pre-sale and then dumped on the broad market afterward. So I would say this is the biggest problem currently in the crypto market, is poor tokenomics, or tokenomics that dilute the entire token, afterward resulting in high inflation. That's why I personally particularly like community-oriented projects very much. Therefore, here you have a definite point of reference. Otherwise, I would like to mention one more thing. Now, at the end of the video, which is unrelated to the crypto projects, there is currently a giveaway at EB1 Lifestyle. The whole thing will later become a decentralized crypto credit card. It's something similar to Amex, so I think most of you know American Express. EB1 is actually set up similarly, especially in terms of the overall card system, or also in terms of the rankings you can achieve, where you can get certain advantages. As I said, it's a partnership, a collaboration. I want to be completely transparent here on my YouTube channel, but nevertheless, it is definitely a partnership that I was happy to enter into. I also know the guys behind it, and it is really impressive what is being delivered in the background, and also in terms of the overall concept. Yes, so American Express is so huge, and in this case, there is already a proven concept. So you can see that the whole thing works, and I definitely see extreme potential for it to be transferred exactly this one-to-one to the blockchain or the crypto market itself, where you can pay with crypto and receive certain cashbacks, similar to the Crypto.com credit card. As mentioned, the whole thing is still in its very early stages. I will definitely accompany this project from A to Z, so you are informed about it. So it really is a project with substance, which I am happy to support, so you are informed about it. And here you definitely have the opportunity to win 10,000 US dollars at the current time. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to buy anything or anything else. You just need to follow their social media profiles. So basically, once on X, once on Telegram, and take a look at the website, just check off these 3 points and you are already definitely eligible for the total giveaway of 10,000 US dollars. It's definitely an extremely cool promotion. I personally have, of course, also participated in it, that you know about it, but as I said, it is definitely an extremely cool concept. I'm curious to see how this whole thing develops in the future. Apart from that, that's it for today. YouTube video. I hope you have a nice overview of what's happening in the current market. It definitely remains incredibly exciting. Feel free to write in the comments whether you think the overarching trend reversal has already begun, both in the traditional market and with Bitcoin, and also with the altcoins. So I would be very interested in your opinion on this matter. Otherwise, feel free to leave a like and subscribe to support me in this regard. But otherwise, I sincerely thank you for your attention, and we'll see each other in the next YouTube video again.